Ways to prevent school shootings.
Understanding the fundamental principles of manipulative techniques through which the search and activation of potential shooters occur also provides the opportunity to identify the organizers of such crimes and prevent similar incidents in the future. How to prevent school shootings.
Method 1. Monitoring content leading to crime. For example, by tracking the content that teenagers who commit mass shootings have been exposed to, it is possible to uncover those who led them to these actions, using them as remotely controlled weapons. This includes identifying specific publications, harmful content, and even particular media channels through which children are encoded to commit school shootings. It is worth noting that identifying potentially harmful content in this case is possible only through its external features. Without specialized knowledge of the puzzle coding method, an ordinary person will not be able to detect hidden puzzle embeds in text or video materials, which ultimately transforms someone into a shooter. Since this method is designed to influence a person's subconsciousness, bypassing critical perception by the conscious mind, it's logical that it is almost impossible to understand where and how these embeds occur if you use consciousness alone. But what can be noticed, and what should be paid attention to when identifying dangerous content? Since heroization of shooters is the first and fundamental wave of information coding, which lays the groundwork in a person's subconsciousness for committing a future crime, we will now provide an analysis of publications on the topic of school shootings. The first thing to observe in these materials is the frequency of publications that repeat the same seemingly meaningless messages. This may be a series of similar articles about a specific school shooting incident that happened a long time ago. Often, these articles are authored by a specific periodical, journalist, or a group of interconnected journalists who continually maintain the same topics in their publications over an extended period of time. Meanwhile, other journalists or media outlets may have already stopped covering this event long ago. Yet this very group of journalists persistently supports the information wave for unknown reasons, and keeps the long-past event alive in the media space. These articles would repeatedly discuss the same subject from different angles. The authors might criticize the police, express sympathy for the shooter's parents, highlight recently uncovered details of the crime, and so on. However, the common thread will still be the same: school shootings. And all these articles will have one significant feature: they will never harshly criticize or condemn the shooter. The second feature of potentially dangerous materials and publications is that discussions of school shootings would always be accompanied by direct or indirect criticism of the authorities, specific officials, and the helplessness of law enforcement agencies. Articles would discuss their mistakes and failures, emphasizing that law enforcement officers lie and deliberately distort facts to cover up their own helplessness. Such publications often appear very similar, and at first glance may even seem reasonable, devoid of aggressive calls to action or clear signs of inciting hatred. However, in reality, the information they contain deeply affects people, leaving a lasting imprint on their subconsciousness. The third feature to watch for is the presence of numbers in the publications. Information containing hidden embeds always includes a numerical code. This could be mentions of dates, exact time when a crime was committed, the number of casualties, or other figures. Yet these numbers would be repeatedly referenced in their publications. The point is that human consciousness and subconsciousness perceive numbers differently. This feature of the work of our subconsciousness is leveraged by the puzzle coding method. As mentioned before, it is extremely challenging for an unprepared individual to detect hidden manipulations of consciousness, and, even more so, subconsciousness, through the puzzle coding method without specialized training. However, there is always a pattern, and identifying this pattern can help pinpoint particularly dangerous content amid the vast flow of information. Once sources of destructive influence containing hidden embeds are identified, it is crucial to promptly halt the propagation of their influence on the broader population. Method 2. Conducting psychological testing in schools to identify increased levels of bipolar disorders. One indicator that students at a particular educational institution have been subjected to hidden external subconscious manipulation is an increase in cases of bipolar affective disorder among them. What's the connection here? Since the initial waves of information coding have a wide radius of impact, certain embeds, parts of the program for mass shootings, infiltrate the subconscious of all affected individuals. What happens to a person in this case? Hidden directives start acting in their subconscious, conflicting with their conscious goals and aspirations. As a result, internal conflict and resistance emerge within the individual. This conflict, triggered by the implanting of foreign elements into the subconscious, eventually manifests as bipolar disorder. Representatives of anti-cultism cannot avoid provoking such conditions when they initiate preparatory waves of coding for school shootings, because this forms the foundation for further imposition of other waves, ultimately launching the program. An illustrative example in this regard is the situation in the Czech Republic, where after the shooting incident at the Faculty of Philosophy of Charles University in Prague in 2023, pertinent information emerged regarding the prevalence of bipolar disorders among the country's young generation. Czech media began disseminating information indicating that approximately 5% of the entire population of the Czech Republic currently suffers from bipolar affective disorder, primarily among the young generation of the Czech shooters' age, namely students. Students of Charles University themselves posted on social media, expressing concern about a troubling trend. Every second student suffers from bipolar affective disorder. This circumstance confirms the fact of external manipulative interference in the subconscious minds of this university's students. As of today, the Czech Republic, particularly its capital, is a hotspot of anti-cult activity. One of the key centers of their activity is located precisely in Prague, and one of the leaders of the local anti-cult movement, Zdeněk Vojtěšek, teaches at the Hussite Theological Faculty of Charles University. Consequently, there are grounds to presume that a thorough analysis of the public activities of anti-cult groups might help establish a correlation between their activities and the increase in cases of bipolar disorders among Czech youth. A deep study of this relationship may ultimately provide compelling evidence that anti-cult organizations are not only linked to school shooting incidents, but are indeed their perpetrators. In fact, shooters are just as much victims of anti-cultists as those they shoot at. Their actions were controlled not by themselves, but by a program embedded in their subconscious. An unprepared person is powerless against such subconscious intervention. Therefore, these children simply found themselves helpless against the external malevolent influence of manipulators. Hence, there should be a pressing discussion about the necessity of banning members of anti-cult organizations from educational institutions, as they may exert covert destructive influence on children. The shooting incident in Prague has prompted Czech students to speak out about the widespread rise of bipolar disorders and seek help. A petition was drawn up urging the Czech government and politicians not to ignore the issue, and to strengthen psychological and psychiatric assistance for all those in need. The petition was signed by over 600 people. This means that the young people themselves are frightened by this situation. Subconsciously, they feel that someone is manipulating their minds, and they fear that anyone among them could be the next to pick up a weapon to harm oneself or others. A similar scenario following school shooting incidents will be observed in all schools that have been targeted by the information coding attacks of anti-cult representatives.
The situation in the Czech Republic clearly demonstrates that bipolar disorder is an inherent and natural accompanying factor in external interventions aimed at programming the subconscious of individuals. If monitoring of educational institutions in other countries is carried out, it will be possible to reveal hotspots of increasing bipolar affective disorders, that is, places already targeted by anti-cultists, where terror attacks are planned in the near future. Typically, in schools and universities where mass shootings have occurred, significantly more students with bipolar disorder can be identified compared to the average statistical rate. Moreover, if these educational institutions conducted regular psychological testing of students, it would reveal that the rapid increase in bipolar disorders occurred precisely within the range of 1 to 3 years before the crime committed by one of their students at that school or university. This period aligns with the initial preparatory waves of information on coding. The strongest impact from the implanted destructive program will be felt by the future shooter themselves. However, once they carry out the act, bipolar disorder will disappear because the cause triggering the internal conflict disappears. The person makes a final choice. Therefore, typically, after committing the crime, this issue is not diagnosed in most shooters. However, it persists in other students at the school. An experienced psychologist only needs to check students for bipolar affective disorder to determine whether these children have been subjected to attempts of external interference in their subconscious. Furthermore, if educational institutions introduce regular psychological testing practices, for example, every 6 months, any alarming trends can be detected in time to take preventive measures. Enhanced security measures in schools, such as metal detectors at entrances, are certainly important and necessary for protection. However, unfortunately, they are not capable of stopping the infiltration of malignant information programs into the subconscious minds of students. Therefore, it is crucial for school psychologists and parents to closely monitor the psychological well-being of children. In particular, attention should be paid to important markers, such as the development of bipolar disorder. Children themselves are likely to attempt to conceal these conditions because they are frightened by them, often not realizing that these states are artificial and induced by remote information, coding through media and internet content they encounter. Thus, a simple factor like caring for the psychological welfare of children and implementing diagnostic procedures to detect bipolar affective disorder is an essential element in preventing tragic events.
The third method for preventing armed attacks in educational institutions: monitoring the country's information field. Another marker that may indicate the preparation site for future crime is the uneven dissemination of information about new cases of school shootings. When a high-profile armed attack occurs at an educational institution with a large number of casualties, it naturally resonates widely in society, and the news wave covers the entire country. Initially, the information erupts like a wildfire, but over time, its intensity diminishes. However, if representatives of anti-cultism have already planned a similar attack in a specific region, the informational echo of this event will resonate longer and louder here than in other regions of the country. Alternatively, information about it may be reactivated in the information field after the news wave subsides. It is important to note here that the names and images of the criminals continue to appear in the news, remaining in the information field of the region or city. This leads to a covert heroization of the shooters, with the key embed spreading that humanity will remember them for life. This phenomenon is a red flag for vigilant observers. If you notice such a trend in your city, be vigilant. The dissemination of a heroized image of shooters is the first preparatory wave of information coding, and a fundamental implant on which the future behavior of the shooter is built. If somewhere this image is artificially sustained in the information space, it means that the psychological indoctrination of the next shooter has already begun in one of the schools in this region. At the same time, conducting psychological testing across educational institutions in the city to detect a sudden increase in the number of bipolar disorders can with a high probability identify the school or university where representatives of anti-cultism have planned the next case of school shooting.
People must also be informed about how to recognize manipulative techniques and how to train their minds not to succumb to covert influences. the most effective measure to prevent school shootings is the complete cessation of the activities of the entire network of global anti-cultism. Everyone who is behind organizing such crimes and programming people to carry them out.
School shooting is a controlled process. The fact that seemingly uncontrolled school shootings are actually a controlled process is evidenced by statistics and chronology of their spread. To gain a more detailed understanding of this trend, let's analyze the incidence and growth of the number of such crimes in various countries where they have occurred. School shootings in Russia. For quite a long time, no evidence of cases of mass shootings in schools has surfaced in Russia. In the 1990s, only one such crime was widely known: the incident at the Kamyshin Cadet School in 1997. The first armed attack on an educational institution in Russia, which resulted in fatalities, is considered to be the shooting at Moscow School No. 263 in February 2014. And the first instance of a school shooting following the so-called Columbine scenario occurred in 2017 in Ivantevka.
What can explain the sudden appearance of a phenomenon such as school shootings in a territory where it was previously uncommon? How can it be explained other than by outside interference? After all, what has changed in Russia since the times when such crimes were unheard of? What has changed is that anti-cultism has gained unprecedented power and influence here. Today, Russian media deliberately spreads the narrative that the cause of mass school shootings in Russia is the influence of similar incidents in the United States. To implant this idea in the masses, the same image of such a crime, Columbine, is most often used. In news reports about school shootings in Russia, you will frequently find a parallel drawn specifically with the Columbine case.
What happened at the Moscow school is being called the American scenario by the Russian press. Incidents like this do indeed happen often in the U.S.
School shootings are common in the U.S., but not in Russia.
Shootings and hostage situations are indeed not uncommon in American schools. A student or former student with a rifle in hand, that's the typical anti-hero of local news.
However, as I mentioned earlier, the first instance of such supposed imitation in Russia occurred in 2017, 18 years after the Columbine events. Why did it take so long for the first imitator to appear in Russia? The answer is simple. Because it's not just imitation. Someone allowed this precedent to happen in Russia and ensured it received widespread publicity. Some Russian propaganda figures, authors, and proponents of the theory alleging the harmful influence of the USA on school shootings in Russia claim that these incidents are characterized by organized activity, supposedly initiated by the US. This argument is supported by a simple propaganda narrative. It is so because historically, the US has always been opposed to Russia on the geopolitical stage. Therefore, America is an enemy, and in this way, the enemy is attacking Russia. However, logically thinking, it is the United States itself that suffers much more from school shootings. Why? Why would they attack themselves? It would be more logical to assume that America suffers the most precisely because its adversaries subject it to massive and regular attacks. The truth is that both the American and Russian peoples are subjected to cynical and sophisticated attacks from their common enemy, global anti-cultism. By trying to divert attention and shift all the blame onto the allegedly bad example set by the United States, the hidden shadow force, who is the ideological mastermind of anti-cultism and terrorism, intended to create a visible image of an enemy, obscuring its own tracks behind mass shootings in both Russia and America, behind the Columbine tragedy and the phenomenon of school shootings as a whole. Today, the threat of school shootings in Russia has become a serious societal issue.
At least 13 people are dead, including at least 7 children, after a shooting at a school in central Russia. In Russia, a gunman killed at least 15 people at a school today, 11 of them children.
Close the door. Some shooting! I hope they'll shoot him.
Hey, buddy, hang in there.
Hold on a bit, okay?
We'll tie it up quickly.
Guys, it's a complete mess. I'm done. I'm in Perm State University. It's a complete mess here. The situation right now is people are being loaded into ambulances. There are the wounded everywhere. I wanted to get my child out, but the best thing for them now is to barricade. They're there.
To explain how this phenomenon suddenly emerged and began to progress, one needs to trace the consequences these terrorist acts brought to the country. What was the political situation at the time of the attack? What changes did this event provoke in that situation? What laws were passed after each new high-profile case? And who ultimately benefited from this, implementing their selfish goals under the guise of a loud news break? Then it becomes evident that the reason for the emergence of school shootings in Russia is not spontaneous copycats. It is simply that the force behind anti-cultism has decided to use this tool of terror now on Russian soil as well. Another confirmation that school shootings are not accidental is the geography of these attacks. Notice that there are specific countries, like the United States, that regularly suffer from school shootings. Then, there are countries where this phenomenon is gaining momentum, like Russia. And there are countries where only isolated incidents have occurred without subsequent recurrences, such as Canada or some European countries.
Breaking news out of Canada, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says 5 people have been killed, 2 more are in critical condition after a school shooting.
A 14-year-old boy has shot dead 8 children at a school in Serbia.
These cases generally did not receive widespread media coverage or gain worldwide notoriety. Many of you, I am sure, are hearing about these incidents for the first time today. And then there are other countries with a myriad of social problems and factors that seem likely to provoke such incidents. Yet, they have never experienced a single school shooting. It's as if some invisible force is protecting them from this. Suppose the cause of school shootings is presumably the uncontrolled imitation of shooters by teenagers. Why does this principle not apply in these countries? This simply indicates that either the representatives of anti-cultism do not yet have their levers of influence in these countries, or it is not yet advantageous for them to carry out such attacks there. However, this does not guarantee that these countries' populations are protected from such crimes. A vivid example is the previously mentioned mass shooting incident in the Czech Republic in 2023.
Breaking news out of Prague, where police say 15 people are dead and dozens injured after a shooting at Charles University. The gunman...
This event occurred during a period of growing dissatisfaction among the population with the political situation in the country and an economic crisis caused by sanctions imposed by the Czech Republic against Russia. Notably, in this situation, the media began actively circulating information that the Czech shooter allegedly cited as his motivation the example of a female shooter from Russia who had carried out an armed attack at a school just a few weeks before these events. Such a confluence of circumstances suggests that the attack in the Czech Republic was not coincidentally carried out at this particular time, nor was the reference to Russia as the inspiration for the crime accidental. It appears that someone wanted to exploit the situation for their own interests. If we examine each such attack closely, we can see that these events always correlate with the political situation in the victim country. For example, they often coincide with upcoming elections, important international negotiations, escalating political tensions within the country, growing public dissatisfaction with the government, and so on. Such events often become significant and high-profile news stories that overshadow other news. During this period, when public attention is focused on the tragedy, anti-cult representatives and the forces behind them can quietly carry out actions they would prefer to keep out of the public eye. Are these coincidences or someone's cold calculation? The most telling evidence of the planned nature of these attacks is their influence both on the life of a single country and on the global community. Each school shooting brings about a series of political and social transformations directed by anti-cult representatives to serve their interests. This leads to significant changes within the state and irreversibly affects the lives of its people. Even one such event leaves an unhealing, bleeding wound on the heart of the entire society. Primarily, such terrorist attacks target parents and all those with children. After all, a terror attack where one child kills other children causes immense shock and upheaval in society. It strikes at the most vulnerable place in every parent, for their life.
Waited hours to be told our daughter would never come home.
The sensationalized details of school shootings spread through the media create a powerful internal fear in people, creating a pervasive sense of constant threat to the lives of their children.
There's no place that's safe anymore, and our public schools should be the safest.
Everyone who's a parent feels that.
This makes no sense. This is impossible. My girl, my 14-year-old baby, I sent her to school yesterday. What is unfathomable is Jamie took a bullet and is dead.
We don't feel safe, and we want it to be addressed.
Schools are not safe anymore.
At the same time, a clear belief forms among the population: the government cannot protect our children.
How dare you? You were paid by them, and you just came out and, what was that, a deposition?
I'm tired. I'm so tired of getting up here and offering condolences.
Therefore, with each new incident, distrust and dissatisfaction with the authorities will only increase.
This is America. We were supposed to be able to do things and be the people we wanted to be, and now we're in a crazy place.
Since we survived a mass shooting in July, I have met with over 130 lawmakers. How is this still happening? How are our children still dying, and why are we failing them?
How do we allow a gunman to come into our children's school? How do they get through security? What security is there? There's no metal detectors. The gunman, a crazy person, just walks right into the school, knocks down the window of my child's door, and starts shooting her.
In the eyes of frightened parents, the authorities are guilty of failing to ensure their children's safety. They are guilty of allowing their children to live in a state that is rotting from within, where their child could become a victim at any moment or even turn into a perpetrator. This subconscious understanding causes feelings of apathy, hopelessness, and hatred towards the current authorities, skillfully inflamed by anti-cult representatives.
This doesn't happen in other countries. It happens in the United States of America.
You've got a beautiful country, you've got beautiful people, but what's the problem? Guns. How does a 7-year-old have a gun?
I'm very angry that this happened, because it keeps happening.
These children survived. This is the shrill screaming of kids trying to get out while their classmates are being murdered.
The phenomenon is that people are artificially instilled with hatred towards any authority in general. Conditions are created that show people that no matter who they elect or place in power, nothing changes. Thus, the belief that all authority is evil becomes firmly rooted in the public consciousness. This process creates a vicious cycle. Artificially induced and maintained fear drives part of the population to demand stricter measures and tougher laws from the authorities. However, these initially well-intentioned initiatives that were supposed to prevent new crimes are subsequently used by anti-cult representatives and their accomplices within state structures against the people themselves. This results in greater subjugation of the populace, increased control over citizens' lives, and the suppression of free speech. Thus, people are gradually stripped of their last rights and freedoms. As a consequence, a previously democratic country moves closer to a totalitarian regime. But at the same time, while one part of the population, driven by fear, advocates for stricter measures, another part, driven by hatred towards the authorities, believes that such authoritarian methods will lead to even greater restrictions on their freedoms and violations of their rights.
Students, parents, and activists gathered outside Tennessee State's Capitol to protest gun violence.
The government would just do something to keep people from getting guns they don't need. It's unnecessary.
To change who is in government.
Wrong-headed leaders who prioritize guns over children.
My gun sits right here on my side and doesn't jump out and shoot anybody. Gun violence!
In a school that allows teachers to carry
guns? You think more guns lead to more death?
The main point in this situation is that anti-cult representatives, through precise and sophisticated manipulations, artificially destabilize and divide society. This causes a split into two opposing camps. Thus, a large mass of people forms who hate the authorities and hate each other. What will this lead to? Unrest, protests, and confrontation. All of this collectively puts the country on the brink of civil war. And this is precisely the final point to which global anti-cultism and the hidden shadow force behind it are currently leading America. This is why mass shootings in schools occur so frequently in the United States. This process is planned and controlled. It is part of the enemy's strategy aimed at destroying democracy, first in the US, and then throughout the world. It is a complex but highly effective scheme carried out by global anti-cult representatives right before the world's eyes, yet unnoticed by anyone. It's worth adding that despite the apparent chaos in the spread of news about these incidents or narratives glorifying the shooters, anti-cult representatives carefully ensure that the information, tainted with their manipulative virus, is delivered precisely and in measured doses. This is to prevent school attacks from becoming too widespread. Excessive numbers of such crimes would diminish their impact, and each subsequent incident would no longer provoke such a strong societal reaction. People are capable of becoming accustomed to anything, even such horrific events. If school shootings happen too frequently, society will eventually adapt. While these events will still induce fear, the constant internal anxiety and worry will diminish. People will remain cautious, but not much more. On the other hand, measured instances of crime open people's minds to the implantation of negatively acting images that go straight into the subconscious, which most people today cannot defend against. Statistics are stubborn things, and they speak for themselves. These attacks' periodicity and growth trends clearly point to the hidden organizers behind this phenomenon.